There's a popular television commercial right now where a lady is eating her little protein pack, and it has some nuts and some cheese and some things in it. And the lady next to her at the park says, I have my protein pack too. And she's eating something out of her hand and reaches over, grabs a handful of grass off the ground, and starts to munch on the grass. And you can see the reaction of the lady next to her in the commercial kind of roll her eyes like, whatever, fiber, I guess. If you're a sheep or a goat or a cow. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. It amazes me how we have, especially in the last, say decade, completely redefined terms that for centuries have been pretty solid in their meaning and application. We've made up new meanings to the words. We've taken words that have strong heritage, words that when we use them, there has been for centuries a common understanding of what that word means. Now, you've heard me mention on this show before that from time to time I'll hear someone speak and they'll come to me afterward knowing that I'm a speech coach, and they'll say, what did you think of my presentation? And I'll say, that was probably one of the most pedantic presentations I've ever heard. 9 times out of 10, they take that as a great compliment. What it tells me is that they don't know the meaning of the word pedantic. There are people who intentionally use lofty words to speak over our heads. There are also people who change the meaning of a word, or they will use a word in the context of a conversation that they have no intention of meaning what the word's actual definition means. In fact, they want to use a word like masculinity and say masculinity is the problem with the world. Well, they sometimes will throw the adjective in front of it. The toxic masculinity is the problem, but here's something you need to understand about that phraseology. What they're not saying is that toxic is a specific type of masculinity. What they're saying is that masculinity is toxic. You understand what I'm saying? What they're not telling you is that there are 2 types of masculinity, good masculinity and toxic masculinity. What they're telling you is that masculinity is best defined as toxic. Therefore, any masculinity is a bad thing. I don't agree with that. I also don't agree that you can simply throw a descriptor or an adjective in front of a word and completely change its meaning and application throughout society. And yet, that's exactly what we have happening. It's very similar to saying words like democratic socialism. I heard a young man on a video say, in democratic socialism, a company owner doesn't get to make all the decisions. Those decisions are made by the employees. Employees have stock, they have ownership, they get to make a decision about how many hours they'll work and how much they'll get paid and what product they'll produce, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've worked in corporate America in a company with over 150,000 employees, and just the group that we worked in was over 5,000 employees. And let me tell you something. It's mayhem in a meeting of 12. When 12 have a project to accomplish and 12 are trying to decide how this project will go and what's the best way to pursue the process and what the ideal outcome would be, 12 have a hard time coming to an agreement. A vote among the 12 still requires that everybody in the room be qualified to make a decision on that project or that process, that they be stakeholders in the process, that they have some understanding what's going to happen when you do A, B, or C. To think of taking that same project and throwing it out there to 150,000 people to vote on, knowing that the 12 in the room had a hard time agreeing on it, and they were the subject matter experts. They were the ones having to make the decision and pay the penalty if it was right or wrong. See, I don't think that society has enough competent people when we can't redefine or rightly define the word masculinity to truly decide how things should go. Not to say they shouldn't have a say. Everyone should have a say. But for the biggest decisions to be made, we should be selecting the best and the brightest, the most experienced and the most educated to make those decisions with reasonable input. Not everyone ambiguously deciding what's best for themselves individually. And when I hear the definition of democratic socialism, according to this young man, It doesn't sound like anything I've heard anybody else say. It just sounds like I'm entitled and I want to be able to vote on how much my paycheck is going to be. I really believe it's a challenge in our society, for our culture, and for our long-term existence. When we pull down the truth, when we pull down understanding, when we dump it all into a mix like a cookie vat and just stir everything together and pull out the words according to the meaning that best suits our opinion of the day, I think we're in trouble. I think what we need to do is get back to leading with truth. Lead with those facts that have been long tested and tried. Lead with those understandings which are the most universally accepted. Lead with truth and with understanding if you want to have influence that will last. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.